Welcome to part 2 of this video covering the News Geezers lunch of October 28, 2017. We're featuring the book Line of Sight, the story of Claus Landsberg and the early years of KTLA Channel 5 here in Los Angeles. On stage for the discussion are Evie DeWolf, who was married to Claus, her son Cleve there on the left, and on the right George Lewis, who was Evie's co-author.
I just had a simply wonderful time with George writing this book. We did consume too much coffee and too many cookies, but we did accomplish a book that needed to be written. And so this is my son who nagged me for years to write about the book.
Decades I nagged her to do this, because it had to be a first-hand account as well as everything that she knew and the letters and this, that, and the other thing that only she had, and I thought, oh, maybe I should try to do something, but I couldn't possibly do it. It was kind of emotional as well, but to tackle it and so forth was something that she was a writer, worked for the LA Times for 30 years.
40 years.
40 years, excuse me. And then to partner up with George was just absolutely inspired. They were a great team together. And I, for one, am extremely grateful that we got this wonderful biography and memoir. It's a combination. It's kind of unique, but it means the world to me, as you can all imagine. But I think it's really important for so many other people to get a sense of what it was like back at that time when this was all beginning, this world. It was fascinating. And I want to tell you, Joel Tater over there, he taught me how to change paper in the teletype machines in the news department, where I subbed for a couple of weeks. And then I did disaster coverage because I was on the crew. And I did do a year at NBC News as an editorial assistant as well. Joel remembers that too. So I maybe qualify as a news geezer, but I abandoned the news world and went into other realms and chose that strange profession of dramatic storytelling and film.
I hear you were a bit of a holy terror hanging around the KTLA studios as a kid. I have a very good source on that.
I was a brat. My dad, the only way he could spend time with me was to take me with him to work, to the station. And so the crew, more often than not, in fact, most of the time, had to babysit me. And I was, in the middle of the night, with my dad, put me in the back of the car and racing up at, 90 miles an hour up to Tehachapi. And I was there at the Tehachapi earthquake. And a dear friend, for many years, still a dear friend, Robin Clark, was shooting camera on that. And part of his responsibility was, hey, look after Clevie. Okay, and then in the back of a pickup truck, I think with John Polish's pickup truck, set up a camera, or it might have been somebody else, but they set up a camera, and Robin gave me a task, and my task was to feed cable in and out of the truck as we went up and down, back and forth on the street. And I have these vivid memories of the walls of tumbled down hotel and this, that, and homes, and it was a mess. But I mean, I still have vivid memories, and I was 6 when that was happening. So yes. And when I went back to work for the crew, they were always wondering, okay, what kind of okay, let's see what he's about now. And now his dad has passed away and so forth. So I went through a lot of tests and trials before they finally said, hey, he's not so bad. And so they accepted me then, and it was fun. And I'm still not tired of this business. I'm still working.
I guess I should mention that I divorced Klaus. I divorced him because he had a mistress. And the mistress was television. Totally demanding, terrible, but I kind of loved the mistress. I got to know the mistress pretty well. It was a ménage à trois. But anyway, we did remain friends, and a year after we divorced, I found out he had this terrible melanoma, and he called me like a desperate child, and said, what am I going to do? I have so much to do, and I've got this terrible thing. And so we remained very close and good friends to the end. And I'm just so glad he left such a good legacy that his children, he has another child he married a second time, and his name is Klaus Franz Landsberg. And he would have been here, and he's just a really nice guy, and I'm his godmother, so you see.
And he's very accomplished as
Very
well,
accomplished.
as a top sound mixer, doing live award shows, and he did the first few seasons of American Idol. He's covered a lot of ground, and he has a
followed
bunch of
his
Emmy Awards
father.
on his shelf.
Technically, he followed into sound. So,
But I want to say something. I have a lot of inspirations in my life, but none greater than this woman here, who a month ago we celebrated her 95th birthday. And so I have a lot to live up on, a lot of goals. I got to get up to 100 or something. I got to try.
that's right.
Evie, you had a backstage pass to that first night when they first signed on as KTLA in January of 1947. And I remember you, it's in the book, but you were kind of PO'd at Bob Hope because you thought he kind of muffed his duties as MC that night. Can you talk about that?
Well, I was pretty upset with Bob Hope because here he was, a star, and kind of, what's this thing, television, It was just like he was looking down on this new medium, what is this? What do I have to do? Well, he was a star at Paramount, so Paramount said, oh, Bob, you've got to go and help Landsberg and maybe introduce the new show, when it opened up as a commercial TV station. So there was Bob Hope, not realizing that he's on live TV. He's got his script, all the papers with him, and he's reading the script like he's on the radio, and fluffed the words. And he was so nervous, he was always asking Klaus, what do I do now? What do I do? So Klaus would say, look at the green light, just look at the green light. And I remember I was so upset because I thought, this guy has no idea what this medium can do, and I was so upset.
Thanks for the memories, Bob. Sure, let's go to Q&A.
I know you guys have a lot of questions. I want to start off, if you don't mind, with a question to Evie. And this is something that was in the book. I would like you to tell the story of how the legendary Stan Chambers, who for a long time was a member of this group until he passed away, how did he wind up getting on the air? It was because of you.
Well, it's very funny because this young man came from the Navy, and Klaus hired him and put him out there in the back, and I don't know, he was doing many chores there, working with film and all that
He was
stuff.
a stagehand, too, wasn't he?
Pardon me?
He was a stagehand.
Yeah, a stagehand. And so one day I said to Klaus, that good-looking guy over there, why do you keep him in the back? He should be out front so everybody could see him. He's a real good-looking guy. So Klaus said, I'll think about it, and pretty soon he did bring him forward. So Stan was very cute. One day he was being honored at City Hall. It was Stan Chambers Day, and I was invited to speak. And I had his new book, one of his books, and he wrote in there that he owed his featured role in television to me. for having put him out front with the cameras. Anyway, Stan was a fabulous fellow, and we were very good friends over the years, and so I think his pride and joy was the pride and joy of KTLA.
How did he get out of Germany? How difficult was it for Klaus to get out of Germany?
The question is, how did Klaus at the time escape from... mic up, please. How did Klaus escape at the time from Germany in the late 30s? How did he accomplish that in the time of Hitler?
Okay. Well, he was an inventor from way back, even as a young fellow. In fact, at 16, he won a major prize in Germany for the best microwave, whatever, transmitter at the time.
Actually, it was a receiver.
A receiver of some kind.
It was shortwave.
Sure. I'm glad I have all this help. Anyway.
It was an electronic device.
I did have it right in the book because I'm a pretty good researcher. But anyway, so Klaus eventually, at about, I would say already 17 or so forth, 18, he had invented something. And he had made all these sketches and so forth, and he thought, well, I should take it to the patent office. So he took it to the Reich patent office, the only one, the German one. And there was a very clever clerk there who looked at the things and thought, I think the Army may want it. I think this is something that they're going to want. So they told Klaus, you go back and do some very specific details. Give us everything you have on this. Come back in a week. So Klaus thought, jeepers, if I've impressed Germans on this, maybe the Americans will be impressed as well. He already had ideas, he thought a lot about Philo Farnsworth, whom he admired, who'd worked in Germany a lot and helped actually with some of the equipment that was used on the 1936 Olympics. So Klaus went home, talked to his grandparents and his parents, and they all said, well, maybe the Americans will be impressed with this because everything was so unstable in those days. So he went to the American embassy in Berlin, and it was very hard to get a visa, and he asked, I would like to go to the United States. And he made a bargain with them. They said, if you give me a visa and I can go there and maybe work in television over there, because by then the Nazis were really persecuting the Jews, and his family was Jewish. So there was a lot of instability. So his parents encouraged him to leave, and he didn't want to leave because what might happen to his parents. Of course, nothing did. They left, and it was okay. But so Klaus made a bargain with the Americans, and he said, you will have my invention. I will give it to the Allied people, the Allies, and but give me a visa and let me go. So I called it the invention is passport to freedom.
I think also it was just an added note. It was after the 36 Olympics, and in 36 he was 20 years old, and when he fled Germany it was 37, so he was 21 at that time, and they had asked for him to. He put off the Germans, you correct me if I'm wrong, by saying that he needed to do some more work on the drawings and such, and
It was a week, 1 week.
yeah, very quickly got out of there with all of this. So it
Yeah,
happened very
if I
fast.
may interject, the gizmo he was working on was an instrument landing and takeoff system for airplanes. And the Luftwaffe thought, hey, we can take off in crappy weather and bomb London, right? I think that's what they were thinking at the time. And obviously the Americans were similarly interested with the World War II about to break out in 2 years.
Well, they decided to take a shot at it, and so Klaus came and was almost immediately hired by Farnsworth in Philadelphia, the labs in Philadelphia. Then he moved on to RCA and NBC and was part of the World's Fair. He helped set up the World's Fair, which was the first time television was shown publicly in the country. And so I thought that was, really special. Very good for his background. His resume was very good.
We answer your question, Les? Thank you. Very passionately, too. Thank you very much. And I'm glad you mentioned the 1936 Olympics. Dennis, what's your question?
Not to deflect from Klaus, but what was it like for a woman working at the LA Times? Were there a lot of women at the Times, and what was that like?
The question
Know
was,
about me?
Evelyn DeWolf, who wrote under that name for the Los Angeles Times for 40 years, the question was, what was it like working as a woman at the Times back in those days?
Well, we got paid less. We didn't like that for the same work that we did, that the men did. But anyway, it was a fantastic time. And I'm glad I worked for the Times when I worked for the Times, because that was the golden era for newspapers. And the Chandler family who owned the paper were very influential in this town. So it was like, for reporters, all of us, it was like open sesame. All we needed to do is, I want to get in there. Oh, sure. You're with the LA Times? Come on in. Those were great days. I know there's a lot more competition among reporters and everything, but in those days, we had certain newspapers that were established, and always, we were given very interesting assignments. I was never hard news, but I was in the features section, and I was given the opportunity to provide ideas, and that to me was terrific, I wanted to ask you a question, all of you. How many of you have written books or are writing books? Okay. Well, we have a few.
5, 6.
That's nice. I think that when we get a little older and we've experienced a lot in life, and we are communicators by nature or by choice, that we should write. We should continue doing what we've done, that's communicating, because I think we have a lot to give our younger friends and all these lovely young people from Pepperdine are here, and I want them to hear this. Anytime you want some help, I don't know if we can give it to you, but we're available, okay? And so I'm always happy to meet the younger people that are as enthusiastic as we have been in our profession.
Do you remember?
that answer
Do you remember
you?
how many more pages the LA Times used to have? And how much better the sports section was?
Now, I think there are some great people at the Times today, thank God. A few are left or exist. And I think the paper has done okay lately. And there was a time when it really went down. We were very disappointed. But I think it's a good newspaper.
Additional questions for any one of these three wonderful individuals, or any single one of them, or as a group? Cleve, I'd like you to answer a question. Of all the things that are in the book and beyond, What is the one most important thing you would like people who may not be familiar until now with the history of your father to know about Claus Landsberg?
That's a good question. I think that one of the most incredible things about him, and I gathered this a lot from when I was working on the crew and talking to so many of the team at KTLA who had worked with him, and particularly through those early years. And I noticed in a shot there of very early on with that first broadcast, commercial broadcast, I seemed to recognize an engineer named Roy White, who was quite the genius himself. A very quiet, mild-mannered guy, but he and John Polich, who was like my godfather, and I grew up with his kids, and an added role model after my dad passed away, that all those people, and Stan particularly, they had such a spirit, and all that time it was about you could do anything. Nothing was impossible. And my dad used to always say, and I heard this, is it was impossible. It just took a little longer, maybe. And there was a can-do attitude, and everybody pitched in. Everybody did everything. When I worked on the crew, which was in the mid '60s, we did everything. You lit the sets, you moved the truck, you drove the trucks, you set up the cameras, you dragged power, you put transmitters up, you did news coverage, you did variety, you did everything. I pulled teleprompter for George Putnam, and anything, wrestling, roller derby, and everybody did it all, and thought nothing about having to do so many different things. But that's just what you did. It was the only way it got off the ground. And the groups of people were very small, doing huge things. And so he led people and developed that culture. And the whole energy and can do, must do, is exemplified in the Operation Big Shot, which the story of that, there's a great speech that I got and read, which was from a guy named Charter Heslop, and he was like, I think, the public relations guy for the Atomic Energy Commission for the atomic bomb blast, and he wrote this thing about what a drama it was. And all the scientists and everything were following to see whether the television guys would be able to pull it off and get this thing on the air, because there were no landlines. The telephone company couldn't set up a transmission thing. And they were basically fabricating these microwave links beyond, and one that was like 140 miles or something or other, way beyond the rated capability of the equipment. And they tweaked and did everything, whatever it took, and finding Mount X. And all in this short timeline. And his description of it and the drama of day to day was phenomenal. And I think those are some of the things that people don't fully grasp, is just these heroic efforts to get news events and other television on the air.
I wanted to add that at that time when he did the atomic bomb feature, he was on his 5th cancer operation, for this melanoma that was invading his body. Nobody knew about it. He kept it to himself. He worked strenuously. He never slept during that period, especially. And I remember learning that Charles Heslop, who was this atomic energy guy in charge of all of the media, and I knew that he'd written letters to his wife. So I managed to get a hold of them in a museum in wherever. I found the museum and
His papers are at I think, University of Oregon, or yeah, I think it's.
It was Oregon, yeah, I think it was Oregon. And I purchased, the right to read them, and they were amazing, because here's a man writing to his wife and he's not holding back on everything. And he would talk about Klaus every once in a while in the letters, and I can't believe this guy. I just can't believe this guy. And I think he's going to fail. No, I don't think he's going to fail because he won't let it fail. And it was those things that made me feel, confirmed things for me that made me very proud of having known Klaus the way I did, too.
Yeah, when I was brought up working on the crew, it was like if you didn't get something figured out or happen, I mean, your dirty laundry was on the air, no matter what kind of a show it was, and because you're doing remotes all the time.
You had
And
10 remotes in one day at one point, right?
oh, there were. I mean, people would shoot one thing, tear down the trucks, and then move them over to another thing, set up the thing, set up the transmitter and the cameras, do another one, maybe a third one, maybe a fourth one. And you'd had different crews, and there were only so many crews. But it's like doing news coverage, and you go out with a van, and you go and cover this story, you move, shut down, go move over and cover another one, and you're going throughout the whole situation. But that's the way of life back then. And then you said something that was kind of key, that it was refusing to fail. And my whole career, I've taken that attitude. I refuse to fail, and if I do, I'm not perfect, well, I'm going to be really pissed off, and I'm going to not fail again, that sort of thing. But that's an attitude of can do, and everybody at KTLA in those early days totally had that. And Joel knows what I'm talking about, particularly. So does Mike Conley, who I worked with way back when, a dear friend. And it's like incredible. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Cleve, before we wrap this up, tell everybody what you do now.
I'm a producer and a production manager. I do television series mostly for the last 10 years. I've worked on a lot of feature films and television movies, particularly on the television movies and on a couple of features. I would produce and production manage. Did stuff like Weekend at Bernie's. I was production manager on that. And Mr. Destiny, a show called Basketball, which was kind of a harebrained comedy, David Zucker deal. Bruce Almighty, and then a lot of shows that you wouldn't necessarily know, but I just finished producing a TV series called Kingdom for DirecTV. Every outlet's got to now have its own original programming. And I've been very involved with the Directors Guild. I'm on the Directors Guild National Board, and was AD UPM Council Chairman for a number of years, and still on the council. And they gave me a nice award once upon a time, about 7 years ago, like as though they thought I was going to retire. But no, I'm not retiring, not yet anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions for anybody?
I would just like to add that George, my dear pal, George is doing some very interesting things nowadays. I kept asking him, when are you going to write a book, your own book? And he said, well. And now I said today, what are you doing, George? And he told me, and I found it very interesting. So you tell them what you
I'm hitting the lecture circuit and telling people how to tell real news from fake news.
George has a lot of great stories. This guy's been everywhere.
He does.
Anybody else with any other questions? Just remain up here for a moment. A reminder that the book is Line of Sight, the story of Klaus Landsberg, his life and vision. There are some copies for sale back on the table there that Evie and Cleve and George are sitting at. They can sell you copies. If you don't buy one today, they're available readily on Amazon. It's a wonderful read. It's a true slice of Los Angeles television in its earliest days, and what an inspiration this man was. So thank you. Now, two other little bits. One is, I would really like to have a News Geezers standing ovation for these three individuals, please. And if you guys want to take a seat for just a moment, they'll be available to take your questions. I just have a closing thought, and then we're going to close this out. One thing, does anybody else have anything they want to say to the group? I always ask. Our next lunch is Saturday, January 27th, 2018, and will be the start of our 8th year. So when I was driving down here at about 9 o'clock this morning, I started thinking about this group and what a wonderful thing it has been, what it means to me, and what it means to all of you. And I came to a conclusion that some of the best friends in life are your longest friends, the ones that you've cherished the greatest number of decades. And that is true for several people in this room. I love you all. Thank you for keeping this alive. And to all of you who I don't know that well, it means a great deal to me that you're here. It means an even greater deal to me that we have students in the room who are going to take over from where we left off. And I hope all of the students in the room, that the friendships that you meet here will encourage you to grow in whatever direction you wind up growing in our business, and that if you enjoy it, after 50 or 60 years, half as much as we have, you will have accomplished a great deal. To all of you, God bless you. Happy holidays. Drive home safely. We'll see you in 2018.
Get a couple. All right.